Hi everyone, welcome back to Atomic Insights. Today we will work on solutions of the IB MYP November 2022 paper. I've noticed that there aren't many practice papers of integrated sciences, especially those that are from IB themselves, and the ones on IB docs aren't formatted well and don't have a mark scheme. So I thought that I should take you step by step through each question. I think the best way to use this video when you're preparing for your e-assessments is to actually try each question on your own, and then you can cross-check if your answers are correct, and if not, you can watch the explanation for it. With that being said, let's jump right into solving.
Here. Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace developed the theory of natural selection, which describes how evolution occurs. Organize the phrases in the correct sequence to describe the process of natural selection for 2 marks. Now, let me just give you a quick brief about evolution. So, firstly, we have random mutations, and then those mutations create favorable conditions, and those favorable conditions then mean that those traits get passed on. Favorable conditions really mean that species who are at an advantage, they create favorable conditions so that they're more likely to get resources, they're more likely to find mates, etc. So their genetic material gets passed down. Now let's take a look at the options. But before we do that, here's what the IB really expects from you, is they want you to create kind of a cycle here where you have the first stage, next stage, third stage, and then the last one, and it all comes back together. So they want the answer in this stage type of format, and we're just gonna fit the letters in according to the options here. So let's take a read. Limited resources against individuals. Okay, that doesn't really sound like the mutation step here. Best trait passed on to the next generation. That also, I don't think that fits the bill. Large population of individuals showing variation. Okay, now that sounds like, just another way to say mutations. So let's go with C as the first stage. Next, we want to create favorable conditions for competition. And what brings out the competition is really limited resources amongst individuals. So the second stage is A. Now we're really left with B and D. And B, immediately when I read it, best trait passed on to the next generation, it sounds like the conclusion of the cycle. Best trait passed down to the next generation, that's really the final step of the process. So let's go ahead and write down B as the last stage, and that leaves us with D as the third stage. Now let's just take a look again just to see if it makes sense, because it's really important to recheck in the exam. So C, large population of individuals showing variation, which leads to A, limited resources amongst individuals, and individuals with best traits more likely to survive and reproduce, which finally leads to B, best trait passed on. Moving on, select the correct definitions. We have parasite, predator, and producer, and we've been given a lot of definitions, and we need to match them correctly to the terms here. So let's take a look. A, an organism that lives in or on another organism and benefits at the host's expense. Okay, that sounds a lot like a parasite. So let's write down A for parasite. An animal that eats plants only and not other animals. Well, that sounds like a herbivore, but we don't really need that right now. C is an animal that kills and eats other animals. Well, that is a predator, and that's the answer for the second one. So we can write down C. An organism that converts inorganic substances into organic ones. As a student, this is one of the producers are one of the types that I had a lot of issue with. But this one's relatively easy. An organism that converts inorganic substances into organic ones is a producer. So we can write down D to complete this question. Well, next question. An adaptation is a feature that has evolved within a population of organisms that makes the population better suited to the environment in which it lives. camels are organisms that have several adaptations that allow them to live in sandy deserts. Choose 4 adaptations from below and state why each adaptation helps the camel survive the sandy ecosystem. All right, now you can solve this question by knowing a lot about camels, but the question is, if you face something like this in the exam, and you don't know a lot about the animal that it's talking about, how do you solve this? Well, the good thing is you don't need to know a lot about camels to answer this question. All you need to know is really understand the environment and the type of adaptation that an animal would need to have to survive in that environment. So when we're talking about sandy deserts, we know that deserts they're pretty hot, they're really sandy, and they also, if we talk about the food source, there's cactuses, which are prickly. So essentially we're talking about the environment here and then the possible food sources that the camel could have. Now using this information, let's explain all of the adaptations. So let's talk about the hump, which contains a lot of fat. And the hump here we can infer, and this is common knowledge really, that a hump stores fats on long journeys in the desert, so the camel doesn't have to eat very frequently, so allows for long periods of not eating. Right. Let's take that's the answer that we have in our mind, but we can't really write this as it is in the paper. So here's how to frame this. We can talk about, the question says hump containing fat. So let's talk about fat. We can say that it stores fat, which can break down energy at times of food scarcity. So really, this what I have in this box here is an easy way to think about what we're dealing with, and what I've written on here is really what you need to write. And you can see how the answer that I've written contains a lot more scientific terminologies, and that's really what the IB examiners are looking for. What they want to see on your answer is really stores fat, breaks down energy, times of food scarcity. They want these really specific terms that make sure, it tells them that you really know what you're talking about here. All right, let's look at the next one then, which are the long eyelashes. So eyelashes, and here I'm just going to directly talk about the answer that you're going to write, because, let's think about this. It's pretty sandy, right? So you would need long eyelashes to keep the sand out of your eyes here. So here's how to write the answer for that, and which is going to be protect eyes from blowing sand and daylight. Well, here you can see that I've not really used a lot of scientific terminology, and the thing is, you don't need to force it. You just need to, be concise, be clear, be really specific, and it's going to be fine. Don't try to force science terminologies when they really aren't required. Next, let's talk about the light-colored fur. And the fur, why would it be light-colored? Well, the desert is something that's really hot, so, let's think about it. Light-colored fur would reflect sunlight, which reduces heat absorption and helps the camel keep cool. So we can just say, and since it's the command term state, we can just write down the answer as is. Reduce heat absorption. Well, that's a really succinct and a really clear answer, right? Which is exactly what they were looking for here. Next, let's talk about the long legs that they have. Well, why would they want long legs? Well, let's see. Again, desert is really hot. They want to be away from that really hot surface to keep themselves cool. So, here's how to write this. Keeps body away from hot sand surface. No, it's really short, it's really concise. That's what they're expecting really. Now next let's talk about the tough lips. This is one of the ones that's really kind of hard to get. And personally, me, if I was a student, I wouldn't go for this since we have to choose 4 from the 7 we've been given. But, you know, if you really understand it, then you can go for it. So, tough lips, well, I've talked about how cacti are really prickly. So, tough lips, here's how to write this, allows for cactus consumption without, I'm just gonna say it like that, without injury. Personally, I wouldn't answer to this, but if you have that understanding, if you have that background knowledge already, then go for it. Let's talk about now the tough pads on knees. So here's how to write this. Protects knees when camels have to kneel. This is also one of those things where if it clicks to you at that moment, then you should consider it. And what I'm talking about here is really, really bad drawing, but bear with me here. This is the camel, and if it wants to sit, it sits like this, in a way, and it's sitting right there. You don't want the knees to get too hot, hence they have like really thick shells there to help with that. Anyway, let's move on to the last one, which is having large flat feet. Okay. Flat feet, why do we want that? Okay. Flat feet, it helps with spreading body weight, and you can kind of infer this from the fact that it's sandy, and you want to prevent sinking in sand. And that completes all of the adaptations you need to explain for this question.
Discovery of fire allowed early humans to cook food. Cooking makes food easier to digest and absorb into the bloodstream. Humans evolved a narrow waist and shortened digestive tract because they were able to cook food. Cows have adapted to their available food source in a different way. Cows evolved a process called rumination to digest plant fibers. A cow has one stomach that is made up of 4 chambers. The first 3 chambers are full of microbes that digest plant material. The last chamber is called the abomasum. The abomasum contains acids and enzymes as in a human stomach.
when the cow goes out to feed, it eats grass as quickly as possible and swallows it.
This
almost
means that
unchanged.
we'll need to add at
Food that
least
goes into the
3
first
good
chamber of the
points
stomach,
to support
the
our
rumen,
argument.
is difficult to digest.
So firstly,
The
we'll add a
microbes cannot
similarity
enter the plant
that
fiber to
both
start the
cows
chemical process of
and
digestion.
humans
The cow has evolved
use
the process of
enzymes.
rumination to break down plant fibers. After swallowing, the food moves around the first
And
three chambers and mixes with the microbes that live there.
stomach
Microbes secrete enzymes into the food.
acid.
The food is brought back up to the mouth and the
Next,
cow gives
we
it
can
a
note
good
the
chew.
structural difference.
This mixes
that
the
a
food
cow
with
has
the
one
enzymes
stomach with 4
so that the
chambers,
process of
while the
chemical
human
digestion
has
can take
single
place.
chambered
The
stomach.
food is then re-swallowed, coming back down into the rumen. The food moves to the abomasum, where the process of digestion is completed. So the question asks, compare and contrast the features shown in the text about the cow's digestive
And then
system
lastly,
with
we
the
want to
human
note the
digestive
adaptive
system.
difference that cows
For
rely
3
on
marks.
microbes and rumination to digest plant fibers, whereas humans cook food to make it easier to digest and have a shorter digestive tract. While these are the main points, you will need to explain these points clearly and flesh them out in your actual answer. The question is, humans use enzymes within the digestive system to break up their food to obtain the necessary nutrients. State 2 functions of enzymes. Now, this is a state question for 2 marks, which means that we just need to simply state the 2 functions of enzymes without an explanation or further description. So, we need to recall our biology knowledge to answer this question. And firstly, we're going to write that enzymes can speed up chemical reactions by acting as catalysts. And the second point we need to mention is that they break down large, insoluble food molecules. And by food molecules, I mean proteins, fats, carbs, into smaller molecules. Great. Next question we need to answer. In the human digestive system, digested food is neutralized when it reaches the small intestine. Use the graphs to determine which enzyme you would expect to see in the small intestine. Justify your answer using scientific reasoning. Alright, now we want to think back to neutralization reactions. What happens? And we know that the stomach has an acidic environment. So we would expect something really basic to neutralize that. So using this information, we can say that the enzyme that we expect is trypsin, right? So we need to write it's trypsin. And then we need to interpret the graph as well. We need to write that the trypsin has optimal activity around 9 pH, which is really basic. And for the third mark, we need to tie all of these observations together. So we need to say the small intestine has an alkaline environment because bile neutralizes stomach acid, so trypsin works best there for protein digestion. And that's your 3 marks. Question. In the small intestine, hydrochloric acid is neutralized with sodium hydrogen carbonate. The word equation for this reaction is, and they've given us the word equation, write down a balanced chemical equation for this reaction. Now, they have given the chemical formula for sodium hydrogen carbonate because it's not really a common formula, but the IB does expect you to know the formulas for hydrochloric acid, sodium chloride, water, and carbon dioxide. So we just need to recall what hydrochloric acid is nothing but HCl plus, and I'm looking at the word equation here while I write this, sodium hydrogen carbonate, which is given. And this turns into sodium chloride plus water plus carbon dioxide. Here's sodium chloride
I'm writing it a little bit down here because there's no space. H2O plus CO2. And now they have mentioned that it needs to be a balanced chemical reaction. On first view, this does appear to be balanced already, but let's check it if that's the case. All right, let's check for H on both sides to see how many there are. So on the left side, I can see 1 and 2 H's. On the right, I can see 2. Cl, I can see 1. And on the right hand side, I can also see 1. And left hand side, I can see 1 Na. So 1. And here, I can see 1 Na as well. And let's count the number of carbon here. 1. And the number of carbon here is also 1. And let's count the number of oxygen, which is 3 here. And we have 1 plus 2. So 3 here as well. So we can say that this chemical equation is balanced just as we wrote it. Now, just know that this is not always going to be the case. And if you want to know how to balance any chemical equation.
So congratulations, you have solved the first question. Comment down below if you got the question right with your queries and suggestions on topics I should cover. If this video was helpful, like, share and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this.